Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Crypto Hipster Podcast. This is your host, Jamil Hassan, the Crypto Hipster, where I bring you founders, entrepreneurs, co-founders, thought leaders, executives, artists, a whole bunch of people, you name it, across the world in crypto and blockchain. And today I have an amazing guest. His name is Diego Lizarzo. He's the Director of Developer Relations at Agoric. Diego, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jamil. I'm really glad to be here. I've been following your podcast already for quite some time, so it's really lovely to be here and to be able to connect with your audience.
That's awesome. I'm flattered. I was wondering who followed me. That's great. So,
well, at least I'm one of them. I don't know about everyone else, but at least I'm one of them.
Thank you so much. That's awesome. So this is gonna be a great podcast. I really look forward to it. And the first question I'm gonna have for you today is this: what is your background, and is it a logical background for what you're doing now?
Well, I would say yes. Right now, I've been kind of like doing developer relations for the last 10 years. So that means that I get to talk with a lot of developers, a lot of people. Most of the time, I get to say like, hey, I'm being paid just to talk with people. It's just that in particular, I'm talking with developers. But before that, before I started with developer relations, I was working as a software developer. So, and I like that, at least for me, because it helps me to connect with the audience, with the people that I'm talking to. It helps me to be able to know some of like the pains that they go through, like the day-to-day, and the different things that sometimes they may encounter. So that's really good. And yeah, like I'll just give you kind of like a general idea of my career. I started in Colombia. That's where I'm from. I started with web development, and then I moved to Spain. I worked for some consulting companies while I was there. And then funnily enough, I got a game designer role, and that indirectly led me to developer relations. And it's because I had to kind of talk with people that were non-technical, that had that were artists, that were producers, that were in marketing. So I figured out like, hey, it seems that I do a good job speaking to others, like trying to figure out like technical things to get them like their way in a language that they could understand. But at the time, I didn't know what to do with that. So it took a couple of years after that to get into DevRel. But after that, like, yeah, I've been doing developer relations for many different companies, big size, small size. And right now, like you mentioned, I'm with Agoric. And the entire idea is to, yeah, like connect with developers, to show them the technology, to show them what we're doing. So like I said, being a software developer at the beginning of my career kind of like helped me to understand their problems and hopefully to connect with them. And that's what I'm doing right now.
Awesome. I had to check real quickly to see if I had I know I had listeners in Spain, and I do have listeners in Colombia. So listen to you.
Great.
Yeah. Agoric. I know I interviewed somebody from Agoric back in February. I can't remember who.
It was Dean. He's one of the founders, and he really likes to kind of like go on different talks. So he's really kind of like passionate about what we're doing. So most of the time, he's one of like the public faces that we have in the company, and we have different talks with him that you can go and you can see that he's moving on the stage and is getting people excited about that. So perhaps it was him. I don't know. Otherwise, could have been perhaps Roland from product management or Santi from marketing. I don't know. Kind of hard. Like we have a good group of people that like to talk.
Awesome. So what do you guys do? What is Agoric all about, and what makes you guys the hidden gem, in crypto?
Yeah, absolutely. So, well, kind of like in simple terms, Agoric is a layer one proof of stake blockchain, and is designed to enable JavaScript developers to rapidly build safe smart contracts. So what that means is that we're building a JavaScript smart contract platform for general purpose use cases. So, and the hidden gem, I think, Agoric is all about leveling up Web3 to make it approachable to millions of developers instead of just like thousands. That is what we're currently building. And right now, building a decentralized application is kind of complicated, like you have all these protocols. It's kind of like a hostile environment, and even small mistakes can permanently lose your users' funds. So what Agoric is kind of like trying to fix that in several ways. And like the first one is the Agoric platform that has kind of like a escrow layer that we call Zoe, which developers can use to manage asset exchanges. And Zoe ensures that your users get what they wanted or they get their money back. So, and that kind of like reduces the risk for developers. And the other thing is the Agoric contracts. Those are written in JavaScript, which is the most popular programming language in existence. And then the Agoric security model allows contracts developers to build with reusable components. And that means that their capabilities can grow exponentially as component libraries get built. So like if you are on React, that's kind of like what you're already used to, like reusing code. And of course, I invite you and everyone in the audience to kind of check agoric.com to learn more about all the technical details. But that's pretty much what we do. And you're going to hear quite likely during this conversation a lot of mentions to JavaScript, because that's a big part of what we're doing.
Let's focus on JavaScript. In my corporate days, back in the day, I was a developer, right? But it's a SQL shop, not JavaScript. I don't know JavaScript, but there are, a lot of JavaScript developers, and there's a pressing need right now for those developers to learn Web3. Why does that need exist? And why do we need more Web3 developer education within the JavaScript dev community?
Yeah, that's great. And the thing is that right now, Web3 is pretty much kind of like changing the things, like the way the things are done, right? So, but there are not enough developers that have the experience and that they have the knowledge to build a new solution and projects using Web3 technologies. So just last year, we had around like 25,000 active developers kind of like in the crypto Web3 community. But that is still really small when you compare it to millions of developers in the Web2 space. And I think it was between like 14 to 17 million JavaScript developers, if I'm not mistaken, in one of like these Stack Overflow surveys that they have every year. So like something around that. So we're talking in one side, thousands of developers, and in the other side, we're talking about millions of developers. So that's a huge difference. And bringing Web2 developers into the conversation means speaking to them in languages that they understand. It means that we, like as Web3 industry, we have to simplify the onboarding process and making it easier for JavaScript developers to use their existing expertise and know-how. It's kind of like the perfect way to accomplish that, showing them how to do it. And these millions of JavaScript developers are always looking for new problems to solve. They're looking to improve existing applications and procedures, to reach new consumers, to build creative outlets for their own skills. But many of them still don't know much about the advantages of Web3, or they may not know where to start. So additionally, many of these developers may have a general understanding of blockchain, but they may lack the specific skills and knowledge needed to develop blockchain applications. So this has created a significant shortage of skilled developers, which can make it difficult for companies to find the talent they need to build and deploy these solutions. And JavaScript has proven to be kind of like a language, a programming language that can make a significant presence in almost every corner of modern technology work, but it is still mostly used in the front end on Web3 applications. So with Agoric, we offer kind of like the opportunity to create smart contracts using JavaScript. And well, that's kind of like closing that gap of how to bring people from the Web2 to the Web3 space.
There's a lot more to be closed, but let's start with the base, right? The basis are compensation. So, compensation for software engineers in DeFi has been rapidly rising. Good for everybody. Sometimes, counterintuitive. While other people think it's a hidden sign of something. What does this metric really represent? Is it pay based on the scarcity of developers, or is there institutional companies trying to onboard new talent?
Well, I think it's a little bit of everything, but it certainly reflects the scarcity of experienced professionals to ideate, to build, and to support these complex projects. But it also goes to show that the skills needed in DeFi and, well, in other Web3 verticals are highly specialized. Not only you would have to understand the technologies that power these applications, but you also need to understand the specific business needs. And that type of profile may be kind of like really hard to feel. I think it would be really interesting to speak with some recruiting people and get their full view on how competitive these positions are. But it is clear that higher, more specialized demand is not only going to bring compensations up. And like you said, in many ways, that's great news for developers interested in the space, because if you have a highly focused career, or in general, if you have a developer experience that can contribute to the growth of Web3, someone is going to be interested in employing you. And in the end, I think this is just another indication that DeFi and Web3 in general are spaces in rapid growth. We are still kind of like quite early in the maturity cycle. And we will see many changes in the next few years. And even though the underlying technologies of Web3 have been explored for a while, and that includes some of the work of Agoric's founders, Web3 only came into the mainstream conversation like just a few years ago. So we are not remotely close to how ubiquitous Web2 is. And I think that's quite exciting. That means that we have the space and the need for many more developers, and that this is a great time to join the ranks of innovators building the next big things.
And how do you join the ranks? I mean, not just coding, but like, what do they have to do? Like, crypto is a very tough industry just to break into, or not to break into, but to get up to the learning curve, right?
Yeah.
So what do they got to focus on other than just coding?
Well, I think there are like many like technical skills and like soft skills that sometimes don't get like the amount of like, they are not as discussed, like as just programming. But I think listening and the ability to be humble are kind of like two big important parts of that, because most technologies, they grow with the constant feedback of customers and users, and we need to be able to pay attention to everyone that is involved in the process, from like deeply technical visionaries to like non-technical users that want to get things done regardless of the cool technologies that may be underneath. So I think from the point of view of developers, we need to kind of keep the ability to keep changing, to keep learning, to evolve. And especially in the tech world, we can't just expect things to remain static for a long time. So just to kind of have like that curiosity, like say like, hey, what's going on here? Let's try it. Let's try to figure out what's going on and how I can get started. That I think it's kind of like a real important for anyone, like anyone that is not developer, non-developer.
Last weekend, my wife and I were checking out the possibility of someday going on a Galapagos cruise. So it's interesting that you use the word evolve. There's an increasing developing phenomenon with institutions, and that is the shift, the evolution from Web 2 to Web 3. How can these institutions bridge that Web 2 to Web 3 evolution gap for developers?
Yeah, well, there are many ways, but right now that come to mind, there are like two really important ones. And the first one is creating the content. The second one is experimentation. So with creating the content, that will help new developers to get the right skills, like to have a clear path on how to get started and how to start creating their own dApps and smart contracts. But also like this content, these tutorials, the bootcamps, certificates, everything else that go there, have to be created for all levels, like they have to be created for like young generations of developers that may just be coming out of like high school or college and want to kind of like join the workforce, but also for seasoned developers that can bring their extensive like experience to the space. And the other part that I was mentioned, that was allowing the experimentation inside of organizations, that will foster the creation of many new projects. And that will bring the institutional support to figure out like the best ways to attain mass adoption. The tech industry kind of like thrives on trial and error. So on kind of like failing fast and learning from the needs of customers and users, and having kind of like a small, sometimes a sponsored guerrilla efforts will create more polished applications and rapidly figure out like what is going to work and what is not going to work. And if I can add a third one, perhaps to that, perhaps it kind of came from into my mind after you mentioned Galapagos, is that helping developers in multiple regions, like in developing countries, to also bring their own diverse experience and opinion to the table. Like we shouldn't just impose like the same models all over the world. And Web3 kind of like sponsors a lot, champions a lot of decentralization. And if we really want to kind of like champion that, giving developers all over the world the means to create solutions for local problems is pretty much logical and needed.
That makes sense. You're going to run up against you, and I don't know if you're finding this. You're going to run up against people who just companies that just don't want to change. Like Facebook, like IBM. Like what do you see as the war against development to migration to Web3, and how do you help your developers navigate through that pushback?
Well, some companies are going to be really smart and they're going to figure out like, look, at the very least, let's hedge our bets and let's try Web3. So some of them may still want to kind of keep their main business going without any changes, but I still say like, hey, why don't we kind of like try to create like a small group that explores this initiative and still kind of like give access to developers inside of their own organization. So those are going to be the smart ones. They're going to be the ones that are going to say like, look, we don't know if this is really the big thing, but we're not going to miss out. Of course, you're going to find other organizations that are going to be completely opposed to it, that are going to try to just keep things the way they are because they have been working for 20, 30, 40 years. So why change? But usually those are the organizations that at some point are going to have to catch up. Like usually when a technology kind of like opens, when a technology brings like new advantages in terms of like user experience or more security or like something that makes, well, all like everyone's life better, then they're not going to be able to kind of like just to stay behind. They will have to join. And in particular with developers, I think educational content and like providing like tried and true paths to learn, that is going to just help them, like to have like something that is going to be available to them in Web3 and Web2. And one of the things that I really love about Agoric is that since we're already using a technology that is quite established, like in this case, JavaScript, a developer could just say like, hey, I can use my existing skills, but a new developer could say, I still can learn JavaScript, learn the Agoric way, learn how to use these things. And even if after a while they don't want to be in the Web3 space, they still can use the same skills, so like that gives them like a lot of job security, because JavaScript is not something, at least with Agoric, not something that is just for the Web3 space. It can be used almost in anything, in gaming, like obviously front end, back end development, and a lot of other applications that you see pretty much every day.
It's interesting you say that, not just Web3, but I saw an article recently that talked about Web4, and I'm like, what's Web4? We're just learning what Web3 is, right? So how does that developer education help accelerate adoption to this, Web 4 or 5 or 6, whatever number they want to use?
Right? Yeah, absolutely. So, well, for once, better and more available, which I think it's important, more available education will only increase the quantity and the quality of the developers working in Web3. So, and that in turn kind of like will improve the applications available to all users. So developer education plays a crucial role in accelerating that adoption in Web3 or Web whatever, by empowering developers with the knowledge, the skills, the confidence that they need to build and innovate impactful dApps. And like I mentioned before, we're still in a period of like rapid growth. We don't know where the next big thing will come from. So giving developers the tools they need will only increase their ability to unleash that creativity that they have and to make a splash in many daily aspects of our lives. The other thing would be perhaps like fostering innovation, although I already mentioned that, but improving developer experience. And developers become like more well-versed in Web3 development, they can contribute to improve like the developer experience, like the existing tools and platforms, and the feedback loop kind of like helps refine all these tools and make it more accessible. And I think the last one that is more direct is enabling developer advocacy. So with more education, developers can become advocates in Web3 for Web3 and spreading awareness of its benefits and advocating for its adoption within their networks and their communities. So that would be kind of like a grassroots movement, a grassroots advocacy that strengthens the overall adoption of Web3. So that directly, that is one of those things, kind of like dog fooding. So if we not only build the dApps, if we not only like build the protocols and the chains that are kind of like powering all this, but also we are kind of like users of those same technologies, then we're going to kind of like start talking first with our families and then with our friends, and then it kind of like goes there. So not only they will like better education for developers would help them to build better like tools, but also to kind of like be more confident in going out and talking with others about it.
Advocacy. I like that. I like the grassroots. And I want to see, we talked about the Galapagos. I want to visit the Galapagos, right?
Sure.
The third point that you said was that you have all these new developers from emerging countries now who are now being involved and are learning. And how have you seen, and you've been here for a few years, like me, how have you seen the impact of COVID and all that flattened and enabling the emerging country developers to be more involved in the crypto ecosystem? How have you seen that all play out?
Well, I think I've seen it. At the same time, I would have loved to kind of like seen it even more. So clearly one change was like the entire thing of like going to the office, like now with having a more remote kind of like way of living, then you see that like these digital nomads are going all over the world, so they are bringing not only like their money, but they are bringing their knowledge. So if, let's say in Colombia, like someone goes to Medellin, that last year we had like Cosmoverse there in Medellin, so then they can bring that knowledge and kind of start working with like local communities. So let's say that they spend like 1 year there, then they already have a lot of knowledge that perhaps was not there before. But also kind of like even with developers just working with different companies, like Agoric is a remote first company. So right now, like it took me almost like 2 or 3 months to kind of like meet my manager in person. And we're going to have an offsite to kind of like meet the entire company like at the end of the year. So right now it's much easier for a developer to say like, look, I may be trying to solve local problems in my country, but I still may be working with like a foreign or company that like most of the company is well distributed. So that helps a lot. The other thing is that in many ways that remote work, everyone kind of like knew. A lot of people were like, I've been doing remote work almost the last 10 years, but that doesn't mean that that was kind of like in the mainstream media. A lot of people still had to go to the office. They still had to kind of work with their coworkers that saw 9 to 5 every day. And for a lot of people, it was almost unimaginable, like to say like, hey, I'm going to work with someone that is in the other side of the States, or like that is in Australia or that is in Europe. So now, because like regular people, non-developers, non-tech people are also kind of like living that kind of life, it is almost kind of like more accepted. And I think it's easier for everyone to just start like this type of like involvement. The thing that is still is kind of like something interesting is that you still see some countries and some areas like North America obviously leading like development in crypto, in Web3. And sometimes it would be interesting to see kind of like more effective efforts coming from other places, so sometimes it feels almost like there's lacking like that little step, like additional step to make it work all around, because you still have like a lot of talented people living all over the world, and many times you lack kind of like more projects coming from like different places. So that's something that I would like to see. And in some of like the international conferences that I had last year, that was visible. In one of them, like we had something like 3,000 developers in Colombia, and from Latin America, I think it was only like 30% of all attendees. So that means that most, like 70% of the rest of the attendees were coming from North America, Europe, and perhaps like a couple more regions. So clearly, even if the event was kind of like local, like most of the attendees were still like coming from abroad. So there's still kind of like a lot of work to do there.
Sounds like it. So let's see. You mentioned before, you mentioned soft skills, right?
Yeah.
Not just the, but actually the soft skills. What are some of the most critical soft skills you see necessary now, and who fills those roles?
Well, some of those roles are going to be filled directly by developers, but clearly, if we want Web3 to be successful, that has to become like a joint effort. So like I'm talking about like a full ecosystem. So anyone that has shipped kind of like a big product should already know that having the best solution sometimes is not enough. And to capture the hearts of consumers and users requires more. So we would have to kind of like, we could have like the best possible systems and it's still not enough adoption. So we need kind of like the best designers, marketers, producers, salespeople, managers, etc. So we need them all to have like successful platforms, dApps, and solutions in general. And I think all of them kind of bring like their own soft skills and hard skills too, like their own know-how. But I think especially in Web3, like what I mentioned before, like that was like the need, the curiosity, like, and the need to evolve. That is really going to be incredibly important. And I think also like another role that sometimes, especially like when I'm talking with developers, is not mentioned enough is the investors. And it's because their confidence in different projects is really what is going to allow us to keep improving the technology. So I'm figuring out like these new solutions. But in all, what I'm trying to say is that we need a well-rounded ecosystem. Like developers are going to be at the core effort of Web3 growth, but many more pieces need to work together to turn it all like into like all that potential into a reality.
Let's talk about those pieces then. As the market recovers, and the market is recovering because we've been in a bear stage for a while, and there are signs of life. What will it take other than just, you said, investors and devs, and what else to fill those gaps and to bring back the what's the word, rallying, or whatever the word, the hype, or whatever, the hype, but like the actual market, to bring back to restore that to prominence again?
Yeah, I think it is a little bit of a combination of a couple of things that I mentioned before. So I think people that are willing to be advocates, and that type of role, it's not necessarily just a developer. It's not just kind of like a marketer. So it pretty much could be anyone that is really passionate about the technology and that is willing to kind of like go and say like, hey, why don't you try this? Sometimes that's all you need, like someone that may have not like any contact with Web3 to be able to say like, sure, let me try it out. Then the other thing is that, unfortunately, being absolutely honest, Web3 sometimes kind of like has carried a lot of bad name. And well, last year was kind of like a harsh one for everyone in the industry. So a lot of people are going to be afraid in the mainstream, kind of like in the common, like regular population, to be like, hey, I don't know about this technology. Hey, I don't really want to invest. Hey, I don't want to try it. And even developers may be kind of like, this is not the space that I want to work in. So like that, like those advocates that are willing to say like, look, I may not kind of like be shouting it down the street, but whenever I have a meetup, whenever I have kind of like a conversation with someone else, I can include it in the conversation. That is going to be kind of like really important, because that is going to change the perception of like other developers, of other tech people, other people working in the tech industry, and also of like the regular like consumer or user that may be kind of like on the fence of like, should I try or shouldn't I try? Apart from that, I think this may be a little bit different, is like artists. And it's because like they are really creative people, and sometimes like their use cases are so different from many others that just being part of that, like even if it's through NFTs or just kind of like coming out with a project that nobody else has kind of like created, I don't know, like an artistic game or an educational effort, they are also going to kind of like bring something else that many times developers, we don't really think about.
You brought up an interesting point. I have to ask about it. So
Sure.
Crypto, this is the first time in human history, I'd say, where you have a convergence. You have a convergence, like everybody talks about, we lost money investing, or like the NFTs went from 3 million to $3, or they don't talk about the convergence of social, economic, and technology being together all at the same time, all at once. This is the first time that's ever happened in human history, right?
Yeah.
So how do you get people to understand that this is a revolution? This is a first time, and maybe last time ever in human history, that something that this will happen at the same time, like the perfect storm.
Well, I think for tech people, is going to be a little bit through education, like that you can explain concepts like decentralization, and then they can get it, and then they can immediately start acting on that. For the regular person, it's going to be a little bit harder, because I think most people don't really care about technologies. If you really think about like something like electricity, yesterday I actually had kind of like an internet outage here in the area. And most of the time, I'm not thinking about like the telecommunication companies that kind of like does the cables and has like all these machines that make all this like miracle that is the internet work. So, but the moment that it stops working, that's when I start kind of like really thinking about that. Like that's when I start kind of like calling the company and getting like, hey, this is what happens. So that's what happens with most consumers, with most users. They don't really care about the technology underneath. They really care about like, how is that going to solve their day-to-day problems. So I think bringing more use case scenarios, like more solutions that really kind of like help people like to feel that in their day-to-day life, that's how they're going to kind of figure out like, oh, this is different. Like this is not something like like a bank, because for a lot of people still it's kind of like just money, like a bank, but it's decentralized. Isn't like, no, like I can use a cryptocurrency for more than just buying things. Like, and things like a DAO, that would be really hard to explain to someone that is not in the technical, like the tech world, but then you begin to kind of like tell them like, look, this, like a DAO could have like a different type of like decision making, like how people that are members of like this organization, they can collaborate in a different way than what you're used to. It's not exactly like a company. It's not exactly like a user group. It's not exactly like things like that. That is going to be hard to explain. But if they begin to get more applications that kind of like little by little show them the different applications of cryptocurrency, of Web3, of the technologies and concepts like decentralization, that's when they're going to be like, that's great. And of course, one of the things that I have kind of like tried to bring to the table whenever I'm talking with non-technical people, it has to do with like, who's going to own your data? Who, especially like personal data. That's something that I think right now a lot of people are a little bit more aware of. And then they figure out like, there were some organizations, governments, companies that sometimes had too much access to what we like want to keep secret, or not secret, but at least private, which I think is really the important part there. Private. Everyone understands that we can share a certain amount of information, but the level of trust that every person has in the world is quite different. But many times we don't get any option. Many times it's like, hey, this is what you need to share to be able to part of this system or to connect with this organization. And we don't really care if you want to share that information. And that's not something that a lot of people are comfortable with, and perhaps a lot of these leaks and like passwords and data, and like how we have seen that some corporations have used personal data, that kind of gives a pause to people. And then I think that's an angle that a lot of people in the Web3 industry should think to educate more the regular user, because then they resonate more with that type of conversation.
I agree. When I tell people about DAOs and what's possible, I say, 90% of the corporate boards right now for stock companies are made up of people and their friends. And DAOs give people who are not in that friendship group, not part of that clique, the opportunity to or be part of the governance. That seems to click more than say, okay, well, technology does this or that. So, I think it's just we have to bring people to the business and to the real application that'll help for them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and kind of like I think it happens to all of us, like I don't know anything about like sending someone to the moon, so if someone from NASA kind of like came and talked to me, I would be a little bit like, I don't know what you're talking about, man. But if they are able to put it in terms that could be applied to my day-to-day life, there's a better chance that I'm going to grasp at least the basic knowledge that they may be talking about. And I think sometimes and that's something that, well, developer relations tries to like mitigate, is that sometimes like developers, we get really excited about the technology just for the sake of the technology. So sometimes we kind of like fail at explaining why is that important. It's like if I started like talking about like data structures or like why JavaScript exists and that there are like many other languages, most people are going to be like, I don't care, I don't understand, and let's move on. So we have to kind of figure out like the best way to kind of like close that gap in terms of knowledge and familiarity, And the good thing is that after crypto kind of like came to the mainstream like parlance and everyone has been talking, I think more people have been interested. It's just that I think we need to keep pushing. This is not going to be something that is going to happen from like next week or next month. Like I mentioned before, we're kind of like in rapid growth, and it's because we're just starting. And it's really funny because a lot of people have been talking about crypto for 10 years, more than 10 years. In the case of some of the Agoric founders, they have been talking about some of the concepts even like for 20 years. But that was kind of like in circles of developers. That was not really kind of like outside. You would not see kind of like an advertisement about like cryptocurrency like 15 years ago. Everyone would be kind of like, what is that thing? Or they would not care, but that has been changing. So it has like some good parts of like being a little bit more in the top of mind of people. Unfortunately, some incidents that I'm not going to get into here have kind of brought some bad press to the space. But hey, I guess it's like everything, like the growing pains of any industry.
I agree. So I enjoyed speaking with you today. This has been a wonderful conversation, and
Thank you.
and thank you. And I have one last question. It's probably the easiest one.
Okay.
How can people find out more information about you, about Agoric, about what you do, what you're up to? How can they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the two easiest ways would be directly going to our website. So that's agoric.com. And then if you want to kind of like learn more and be a little bit more involved, we have like almost every month, like a community call. So then we can like give people, especially developers, a little bit of an idea of what are like the things that we're working on and things like that. We also have an office hours that goes every Wednesday, I think around like noon Eastern time. But usually that's quite focused on developers, like if they already are interested in the technology, if they have like some sort of like problems and all that. So like perhaps the community call would be a little bit for everyone. And if you just want to kind of like get the general idea of what we're doing, agoric.com is the best place to go to.
Excellent. Thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you very much. I really love the conversation. And yeah, I hope to at some point come back and join someone else like to talk about like this space. I'm really passionate about it and I really love to talk about it. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamel.